So now we're ready to do some sewing. This is the first block that you're going to be making. It's called Hopscotch, and I named it that because it reminded me of the fun game that you used to play where you draw squares on the pavement and numbers and hop and jump between them. So we're going to do a little bit of strip piecing to make these 4 patches. I'm going to show you how to line all your seams up beautifully, and then you'll be able to make this block. We're going to do some strip sewing first, and what that means is we're going to take our two 2-inch strips, the dark and the light, and we're going to put them together, right sides together, and then we're going to sew the 1/4 inch seam down here. So this is my machine. I've got a Janome 9400, and I'm actually using my walking foot at the moment, but it has a 1/4 inch foot on it. So what we're going to do is just run along this pair of strips and sew them. And as I go, I'm just making sure that I've got my edges lined up all the time. You'll notice that I don't pull from the back. That can make your timing go out on your machine. So your machine's strong, it knows how to do the timing and everything, so you're going to let it do that timing and do that sewing. And your job is just to guide the fabric through. So you don't need to be in a hurry, just work through and try and keep your stitching as even as possible. Now that's done, this was 2 inches, this was 2 inches. When we open it out, we're going to lose 1/2 inch. So you should find that measuring from here to here is going to be 3.5 inches. So let's try that out with our ruler. If I put my ruler on, make sure I don't have a pleat in here, then this is going to be 1 3/4 here, and this is 3.5 here. So that's the size that you want to have when you've sewn those strips together. If you find that this is too big, then that means that your 1/4 inch seam is a little bit too small. And if you find that it's less than 3.5, that just means that your seam is a little bit too big. So I don't tend to be one that goes by measuring my seam. If I measured my seam, I would say it's very slightly under 1/4 inch, and that's what they call a scant quarter seam. The reason for that is that when I fold my fabric back, there's a tiny little bit, a couple of threads that get into that fold. No matter how well I press it, and I try to get pleats out when I press it, but it's going to get taken up. So that's why they call it a scant 1/4 inch seam, just maybe a thread or two's width less than a 1/4 inch. And so you really are better off measuring the results of what you've sewn by measuring across here and not measuring your seam itself. So the next thing we're going to do is to press this, and to press the black and open it up and then press it open, and then we'll be cutting it into slices. Now just to press, I've got the black on top and I'm pressing down firmly with the iron, and that's to set the seam. Then I can open it out and press it towards the black fabric. I'm going to show you 2 different ways of cutting the slices from this strip set that we've just sewn. One is using your ordinary ruler, and the other one is going to be using the Creative Grid Stripology ruler. So the first thing we're going to do is just trim up the end of our strip set. And I like to place a line from my ruler on the seam, and you can wobble the fabric so that it's all straight along there. Then I'm going to trim on the right hand side. So I'm doing this right-handed at the moment. Then I'm going to flip this round. So if you were left-handed, you would trim on the left-hand side, flip it round and then cut on the right. So using an ordinary ruler, we need 2-inch slices from this. So we want to put our 2-inch line on the edge of our fabric and a line here on the seam. Then we take a slice and then we continue along until we've taken 14 slices from our strip set. So each time you reposition the ruler with the 2-inch on the end and then cut. So one of the extra rulers I recommended for this class is the Stripology, and it's going to really come into its own when we're cutting our sashings and so on, but also for cutting strip sets like this. So this ruler has slots at 1/4-inch intervals along like this, and I'm going to be doing my neatening up using the 0 slot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to position this line. I'm going to take this 2-inch line and position it here on the seam, because that gives me room to get my cutter into the slot down here. And I've put a little bit of fabric overhanging on the left hand side so that I can cut that 0 there. And now all I need to do is move along every 2 inches and cut. So I'm going to cut at 2 inches, 4 inches, 6. So you can see as I'm going along here, I'm not having to do any repositioning at all. So there's 12, 14, 16, 18. So I can get up to 20 like this, and I could actually do more if I folded my strip. But this is just to show you. So I've got all those strips cut. And now to do the rest of them. So how many have I got so far? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. So I need 3 more. So if I position it again on here, put that 2-inch line across my seam just to position in the right place for cutting. Make sure the 0 is on fabric. And 6 is going to be my last cut, so I've got plenty of room here. And that's because I oversized the strip that I'm cutting from. So 0, 2, 4, and 6. So that's all 14 of my pieces cut. And now we're ready to sew those together into the checkerboards. Getting ready to sew these. Line those seams up, feel it. If you can feel a lump, they're overlapping, and if you can feel a gap, then they're too far apart. So you can pop a pin in there, and if you're a beginner, it's quite good to put a pin in either end as well, just to make sure those ends line up. So now we're just going to sew all these 7 sets together to make our 4 patches. And what I'm doing here is I'm chain piecing. So each time I've sewn one, I'm leaving it under the foot of the sewing machine, getting my next one lined up, and then following it along with the next one. So just one after the other. And this is a great way to speed the process up, and also it saves you on thread. And now we're going to take them over to the ironing board. Just set that seam down so it makes it easy to fold back. Fold it back, it doesn't matter which way because they're both exactly the same, and give it a really good press. You can see that I'm pressing, I'm not wobbling the iron around. Ta-da! There we go, so that's our 4 patches done. So the next job is to lay your pieces out ready for the next part of the sewing. You can see I have my pink square at the top, then a 4 patch, and then my purple floral. And I've got 3 sets of those. And on the right hand side I've got 4 patch and then a floral and then a 4 patch. and I have 2 sets of those. So the next thing we're going to do is to make these units. Have them laid out next to you by the sewing machine. I'm doing the ones with the pink square at the top, so I just picked my pink square up, lining it up with my 4 patch, and I'll sew that one. And then I'm just doing that for all 3, doing my chain piecing again. Just make sure those ends are lined up, and if you have a problem, just pop a pin in and you'll be sure that your ends are going to line up. Just like that. Where you've got a seam that is folded towards your sewing machine, it's good to just push it down with a stiletto, or very carefully with your finger before it reaches the needle. So that's the top section, and then we're going to add our floral square onto the bottom. So I'll just lift that up, place it on there, bring it over to the machine, line everything up, and then we'll pin the other end. This really avoids you having little bits sticking out at the ends, especially when you're a beginner and you tend to panic about those, so this will stop that from happening. And you should take your pins out before you reach them so you don't run over the pins. So now I've done all 3 of those first sections, I'm moving on to these ones. Got my 4 patch, just make sure the black is in the top right and bottom left, and line it up with your floral and then sew those. So now I've done both of those top parts, I'm going to lay it down, check my position, got the black in the top right, place it on top and sew those together. So that's those sections, and now we're ready to press these, which we're going to press towards the floral, and then we'll be ready to put all the sections together to complete the block. Now all of our units we're pressing towards the whole squares, and if you could watch my right hand, I'm just tugging very gently to make sure that I'm not going to introduce a pleat on the front. That's something that's quite easily done. And you'll find if you press a pleat in, it's quite hard to unpress it, and it also makes your measurements not work. So now you should find that if you put a ruler on top, the 6-inch line on one seam, then the 3-inch line should be on the other seam. Here are our units all sewn and laid out in the right order so that we can now sew them together to finish our block. I've brought them over to the sewing machine all stacked up in the right order. And so if this is my right hand side, I can sew this seam between these 2 sections. I want to line up my seams by placing them opposite each other, squishing them until they pop next to each other and just feeling, making sure they're in the right place. And I've popped the pin into that seam allowance, and then this one I'm lining them up, feel them into the right place. This time I'm going to put the pin on that side because of the seam allowance that's on the back poking forward, and that's going to prevent that seam from flipping as I sew. So make sure your ends are lined up as well. So when you take it out of the machine, just make sure you have that pink square in the top right, and then we're going to get our next piece with the pink square at the bottom, and we'll join those together. Okay, so now we're just going to carry on. We've got 2 more units to join onto this block, and then we'll be done. So here's my final unit with the pink at the top, and we'll get that one sewn on. So here's our block, and we're just ready to press now. What I'm going to do is to press it towards the units that have the 2 plain pieces in them, and that will minimise the amount of bulk we've got. So I'll set my seam first. And then open it out. So I'm just pushing with the tip of the iron just to make sure I don't iron any pleats in there. So first seam, the next seam, I'm going to press here. Open it out, and it's going this way. This one I'm going to press this side. And this last one. Okay, now I'm going to give you the talk about perfection. Here's my block. I've finished it. It's supposed to measure 9.5 by 15.5. My block is slightly under that, and I don't mind. I always make my blocks slightly small. There doesn't seem to be much I can do about it, and they always fit. So if you're out by less than 1/4 inch, just don't worry about it. It'll all work out fine. And the reason for that is we're going to cut our next pieces, the whole pieces that this sits next to, all to size, and then we'll pin everything, and then we'll make it fit. And the same goes for matching your points. If you're a beginner, don't expect to get your points matched perfectly straight away. It does take practice, and guess what? You're the only person that will notice if they're not absolutely spot on.